welcome to the Wellness Virtually Show with Leah. Greg Carpenter is my guest today. He is a licensed marriage and family therapist and energy and sound psychotherapist working in private practice for 34 years. This is Greg at a recent sound bath. He has this on YouTube. You can hear his sound therapy. So visit Greg's YouTube channel. Greg also uses emotional freedom technique as well as sound therapy. Greg has a spiritual and theological background. Which he feels aids him in being more sensitive to the psychological, energetic, relational, and spiritual dimensions of life. So let you listen to the rest of this, and we'll join Greg to find out more about his therapy practice. Hi, Greg. How are you?
Very good. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to have Greg Carpenter here. I've known you for years, and you're just a very unique therapist that I thought people need to know about with your sound healing combined with the therapy and EFT as well. So please share with us, how you got started on the path of integrating that into your practice.
Well, I've been a therapist since was a pastor for 20 years, but about 4 years into my ministry of serving a church, I decided to go back and become a family therapist as well. And so I did that part-time. And then in 2004, I shifted out into private practice full-time. And around that time, I took my first EFT class. And my wife was always into energy psychology and was a Reiki master. And I was open to it, but a little skeptical. But when I had that first real hands-on energy experience was in a meditation class where they said, put this person in front of you and then visualize where you need to place your hands. And so we're doing this meditation, and I'm visualizing what I knew from my reading was the heart chakra area, this beam of light coming out. So I take my hand, and I remember it was like a definite feeling of heat and energy. And then I go, is this real? And I push my hand over here. Now I had all the head knowledge on this, but I'd never experienced it before. Then I bring my hands back, and it was just so palpable. I knew it wasn't my head playing tricks on me. This was real. And so then I put my hands there on this woman, right in the center of her back. And after the exercise was over, she said it was like electricity just shot throughout her entire body, head to toe, down her fingertips. So that was my first kind of real definite, oh, this is really something to this. And then that kind of took off, and EFT was kind of the main, where emotional freedom technique was the main way I learned that, by tapping on acupuncture points and removing blocks in the meridian systems. And then I also did Reiki level 1 and theta training. And so I was kind of off and running. And then that morphed into some other techniques and modalities, and then also into the sound therapy.
Yeah, excellent. So tell us about the sound healing part, how you integrate that in, and what that's like for your clients.
Well, back in 2011, I got into the drum circles, right? But just before that, I had been introduced to Himalayan singing bowls, which I actually have one right here.
Oh, you have to share it. You have to do it.
We'll see how the sound can be a little wonky on Zoom.
Yeah.
Coming out okay?
It's coming out okay. Not perfect, but it's good. It's all good. Yes.
So that's called singing the bowl. Of course, then you can strike it as another way to get tone. But I had a little tiny one, my very first one, was I started to read about brainwave entrainment, which is basically your brain waves, the way they fire will sync up and entrain to external stimuli. So if you got something really stressfully sounding around, your brain will sync up that, you'll get stressed. If you have something soothing and relaxing, your brain will start to fire in a more soothing and relaxing factor. So studying that, I got really interested in the singing bowls, and then the drumming. how I could use those. So one of the ways I use the singing bowls is I have this big easy chair, big fat arms, big fat headrest, and I'll put a bowl at the person's feet, two on the arms, and then two behind, and then I'll just play those. And it would help my clients experience a much deeper place of relaxation. Sound has this one, relaxing sound has this wonderful way of getting the conscious mind out of the way, getting you out of your head and the monkey mind and into your body. And so people would experience really deep relaxation that they hadn't really felt before. So that would be the first way I would use it. The second level, as I'm talking to people, and if they were talking about things that were upsetting them and they were tuning into difficult emotions, I would just intervene playing the bowls. I might use the drum, and that would be a way to help them move that emotion through the person. The way I think about emotions, emotions are information packets that come up to give us and tell us what's going on. And then they're supposed to flow through us. So imagine if you have a UPS guy, he brings off, a packet, and he drops it on your porch, and then he hangs out there and doesn't leave, right? At first,
Oh, wow.
you might kind of think, well, that's interesting. But after a while, you'd be like, would you get off my porch, particularly during the pandemic, right?
My dog would be barking and driving me a little bit more like crazy and getting more emotional about it.
Well, that's kind of what happens in our bodies, right? Is that when emotion hangs out that was meant to flow through us, it either means something is unresolved that in our outer world that we need to work on. Maybe I need to go talk to someone, or something's going on in my inner world that is hanging out there. And so, and then as you said, the dog barking is another analogy of other emotions start to come up. You start to beat yourself up for feeling anxious, right? I shouldn't be so anxious. Why am I anxious all the time? Or I shouldn't get so angry. So all these domino effects, and then you get into the state where we call it in therapy, you're emotionally dysregulated, which means you're upset.
Yeah.
And so
Fancy word for upset.
yes, all these tools are about helping to kind of create that shift.
Yeah, I really like what you said too. I think it's so important that people realize the effects of sound and music, because honestly, everything is vibratory and sound is very much in tune with who we are, what we are, and our cells, our DNA, all of it. So I think it's important when we're looking at, I know there's a scientist that had a study on water, and they froze the water and they analyzed the crystals in the water.
Right.
And the molecules. Do you remember that study?
I do. It's a Japanese guy, I think.
Yes.
Starts with an M, but I can't remember his
right
name.
now
Yeah.
either. But, I just think it's fascinating when you realize the impact of like vibration from sound and what happens. So bringing, like you said, very calming sounds when you're stressed. It's actually part of the Ayurvedic practices for tapping into your inner pharmacy to use sound healing. So it's something that's been, used and researched for over 10,000 years by Ayurveda. So it's interesting that it's coming into play now,
And yeah, finally, with the advances in neuroscience, we're starting to get some science behind what's been known for a long time.
Yes.
Like sound therapy, there's some science now coming out establishing its effectiveness, but, indigenous cultures have been practicing this for millennia, or at least thousands of years.
Right. So tell us about stress, anxiety, trauma, and relationship issues in energy psychology. You kind of touched on it. What are some coping skills that people can use during this pandemic that's related to those areas? Because that with the pandemic, we're seeing increased domestic violence rates. We're seeing a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, people getting depressed. What can people do from your perspective as a therapist?
Rick Hansen, who's a psychologist who wrote The Buddha's Brain and really is big in mindfulness, I really highly recommend him because he's such an authentic and gentle guy, but he has some really helpful ideas. So he has a 3-step process, and then maybe I'll tell you about how I kind of utilize this in my own experiment. He has a 3-step process, which the first skill is noticing. So I actually have people, I hand them a little piece of paper, but you don't really have to have the paper, but it tells you literally what each number means. So I have them rate from 0 to 10, 10 being the worst. 3 times during the day, they whip this out and say, okay, where am I? So increasing your noticing skills about what's going on, your emotional state in your body, the images, the thoughts, the feelings that are going on, just the level of distress. And so the first skill is really increasing your noticing skills. Of course, as you do that, you're going to notice how stressed you are. And then the next step is how do you shift that? So his second step is shifting that. So basically what happens psychologically when we pause and we tune in to what's bothering us, quite often it's like a little 2-year-old saying, I want attention. And when you let them climb up on your lap and you give attention, 30 seconds later, they're off your lap and running around again. But if you keep ignoring them, what happens? They'll bug you forever, right?
Yes.
So they get that attention. And our parts and our emotions can be like that, where if we ignore them and resist them, they build up a head of steam. When we tune into them, often they'll relax a little bit or shift just by focusing our attention. Now, sometimes if they felt neglected, they will actually get worse. And that's when we need to actively shift. And number 2 would be shifting techniques. And so my favorite go-to shifting techniques are using sound, which includes brainwave music. I have the old-fashioned little MP3 player here that I still carry and use, or I use just the iPhone headphones. And just turning that on and playing that to get my nervous system to kind of reboot. Also tapping on acupuncture points and tuning into, so you're not trying to tap away the feeling, you're literally just tuning into it and tapping to get it to shift and flow through you. Then also there's breath work. There's a whole, I could go through a whole list. I have a whole big toolbox, but those are the key ones is the tapping, excuse me, and then and using a variety of different sounds, breath work. And then the important that people miss is that if you have shifts to something, number 3 is what Hansen calls letting in the good. Now, people may not be aware of, our brain has a negativity bias, which simply means it's more interested in survival.
It's primitive, right?
Right, than it is in pleasure. And so what happens is when we have painful experiences, it stores it more easily into memory. And then that kind of primes us to be on the lookout for more things that could happen like that. It will store, obviously, positive things, particularly when they're really big, but we can help that along if we let in the good, just take 15 to 30 seconds, just tune into that body sensation of that motion shifting or any good thing that's going on. And just taking 15 to 30 seconds. You can also add tapping just to tap it in, but by tuning into that, you're storing it into your memory system more and you're building up that bank vault of positive memories that then become resources that you can go and get. So that's his 3-step process. So how I applied this to myself was I started to learn about neuroplasticity, which simply means the way your brain fires is the way it wires. So the good news is that you can undo things because the brain is malleable and flexible enough to do that. The bad news is in a pandemic like this, the more we allow ourselves to get anxious, over a period of time, our brain gets wired for anxiety. So it becomes easier to get anxious. And now our brain is kind of programmed to look for more threats and more dangers. And so that's why these coping techniques are so important. So what happened is I decided, all right, I'm not going to let myself get over a 5. And if I do, what I'm going to tell myself is the fact that I'm worrying is a bigger deal than what I'm actually worrying about. So anytime I was over a 5 on the 10 scale, and by the way, a 5 for me would be like if I sprain my ankle, it would be my ankle's hurting, but I'm not limping yet. So it's in my thoughts, I'm aware of it, but I can kind of cover it up. If you get up to 8, 9, or 10, now you're not able to function. It's really.
So this is the evaluation scale that you're using.
On the 1 to 10, yeah.
1 to 10.
So when I got over 5, so I started doing, I would just put the headphones on, turn them down real low, listen, didn't meditate, just went about doing whatever I was doing. And you would feel that relaxation response, and pretty soon the nervous system would let go of whatever it was and reboot, and you'd be like, that's really not that big a deal. Or you come up with a creative solution to do it. Or I would tap on things. Of course, tapping, we won't go into actually teaching the tapping, but on a simple way is you just aim your attention at the problems and you tap on these acupuncture points. And then you notice whatever comes up, you follow that and you rinse and repeat as it continues to go down. My favorite story of tapping is, I'll make it very short. I was in a meeting and I had told something to somebody in confidence, and then they used that against me in the meeting. Oh, I
Oh,
was furious. And I
yes.
spiked up to a 9. Now, coming from the Midwest, being civil is really important. So I didn't say anything, but I just got up and left. And I went into the bathroom, and no one's in there, fortunately. And I'm ranting, I'm fuming, I'm muttering quietly because I don't want anybody to think that's crazy. But I'm muttering and I'm just tapping. And an old childhood experience popped up. And I went from like a 9 to a 3, whoosh, in
Wow.
about 3 rounds of tapping, because there was something from my childhood that was charging me up. So what I tell people, if you're way over a 5 on a 10 scale, chances are it's not just about what's in front of you, unless it's life or death. It's probably some other older experiences that you don't realize or that are kind of coming in, and like your barking dog, right? You got the
Right.
mailman, you want to get the other mail, and then the barking dog comes, and you don't even know in that case that it is a barking dog. It's just you
Yeah.
think it's because of the person in front of you.
It's the
So that was,
limiting belief, right? It's a limiting belief that, maybe you experienced something similar when you were a kid and you have this limiting belief going on that's attached to it. And it's like, oh, your subconscious is kind of identifying it as similar to that negative experience that happened when you were a child. Is that kind of the
well,
analogy there?
one of the negative beliefs that a lot of my clients have is a variation of I'm bad, I'm a piece of garbage, I'm worthless. So that's what I call kind of a core, at the very root, negative belief that we can
Yeah.
absorb through our childhood. And then you can have other negative beliefs that, like a tabletop, that kind of step on top of that, but the core one's usually at the bottom. In this particular case, one of my negative experiences, I don't like to be blindsided, and that's what happened. He blindsided me, and that triggered some old feelings that came up. And so it's so neat to have this tool to move through that so quickly, because normally without that, once I get angry, it takes a long I don't get angry easily, but once I do, it takes a long time to wash out of me, unless I'm utilizing some of these techniques to help move it along.
It's so interesting how we can change the physiology and shift immediately. And I think it's also very important to be aware of that physiology that takes place. And, when you're upset, you're inspiring cortisol, which can be harmful over time. So you have to be mindful of that, So I think it's important that I think everyone should be taught these tools in school, don't you? I think there should be a class in
Absolutely. Unfortunately, by
kids.
the time I learned these, my kids were both teenagers, so they're like, they don't want to listen to you at that age.
Yeah, right.
If I'd caught them when they're younger, they would come to me if it was something pretty big and say, "Dad, will you help me tap on this?" But the reality is, yes, to start very young, kids love it because their energy moves so easily. They'll
Yeah,
start to teach young kids like 5 and 6 will even start to teach each other how to
yes,
how to do it. It's
right.
pretty amazing tool, and yeah. So I think, yeah, starting with kids is great. But
Can
the
you,
cortisol and adrenaline effect, you said, I wanted to say a little bit about. So in my experiment, I did this, and it worked so well. Then I said, okay, I'm going to intervene if I'm over a 4, and then over a 3. Eventually, I got to where I'm going to intervene if I'm over a 2, and the 2 for me would be just no body charge on it, but just your mind's kind of going to something negative. Example would be that with the pandemic, it would be I'm thinking about the pandemic and how long is this going to last, and is it going to get worse? But I'm not really feeling stressed about it. That would be a 2 to me. But yet my mind is kind of going there. So I intervened there. I got in such an incredibly centered place that premature ventricular heart contractions, skipping a beat of your heart, that I had for 10 years completely disappeared.
wow,
And so I really credit it to, I became more intolerant to stress and intervene and noticed it earlier and then intervene earlier. And it really did, you could feel it literally rewire my nervous system. You
that's
know,
interesting.
we often talk about the window of tolerance would be when you're inside the window, you can be with your feelings and notice them, and then they flow through pretty easily. When it's wider, it's easier for that to happen. But when it's narrower, we pop up into the fight or flight stage or the freeze response, right? And then we, the fancy term, we get emotionally dysregulated. And so what happened is you could literally feel neurologically the brain widening, so that I could, sit with my feelings and be with them and not have them trigger me into that fight or flight or that freeze response. And so it was a really cool experience. I'm always eager to share that with my clients because I want them to have that same positive experience.
Very empowering. I love that. That way you're looking at it, that you don't tolerate the stress. You sit and you get to that space where you're calm and you're reacting differently, because I think a lot of times people have that reactive state, the catastrophic reaction, and things aren't even as bad as what as they are reacting, and the harm they're doing to their bodies from that reaction. And
Exactly, yeah.
yeah, and I find, it's really powerful knowledge too, to know with the Ayurveda piece. That's what I'm really into, is the Ayurveda, like knowing what your mind body type is and what your basic reaction is. Like that toolbox that you're talking about is so critical. And there's so many different things, like you said, that you could have sitting in the toolbox. But if you know the specifics of how your certain mind body type will react, you can just pull out that tool immediately. It's like we really need to explore that. And like you're explaining these different techniques, explore that. And it's almost like, here's your 911 kit for when you're feeling that level of stress.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor. And then you can even take it, like I often carry my little MP3 player with me, not so much because I struggle with anxiety a lot, but then it also moves to the next level. I want to go from 0, right, to thriving and feeling great and feeling alive. And so often I'm noticing, not that I'm anxious, but maybe I'm brain's feeling a little foggy, or maybe I'm a little cranky, or what, and then I want to intervene just to kind of let that flow through me quicker so I can get back to that place of feeling more alive and in that thriving zone. Of course, we're human. We don't hang out there all the time, but it gives me a much greater sense of control. What I tell my clients is internal locus of control is a belief system that what happens to me isn't as important as how I respond to it. And external locus of control is a belief that, no, what's most important is what happens to me. So they did surveys, and they found that people who had internal locus of control recovered faster from surgery post-operatively than people who had external locus of control. Because the external locus of control would be like, work on me, fix me. You do it, and I'll just sit here. I'm be a passive resistant. Internal locus of control believed that how they responded and what they did in that post-operative care was really important. And so they found that they tended to recover faster.
Wow, that's fascinating.
So I think that really applies to the pandemic. What we're going through is, I have a 95-year-old father who was a medic in World War II and on Normandy Beach, and he's seen a lot. And he was telling me, I've never seen anything like this in my lifetime. And so what we're going through is really, really big, and we can choose to focus on that. And we do want to acknowledge that. It's not like we want to be in denial and do a spiritual bypass, but we can also focus on what's our resources, and one of the ways but think about the other side of that. That means their immune systems are working well. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of people who aren't having serious effects with that. And so we don't hear about that in the news, right? Or we don't hear about, work on your mental and spiritual health to keep your immune system really strong.
Right.
And so, the news is all about fear.
I know, that's exactly right. When the pandemic first began, I was doing some education on different ways to boost immunity, lower stress, because I felt that that's a gap. And I think more of that needs to happen. People need to understand, basically, there's no cure right now. There's no vaccine. The only defense that we have, along with social distancing and wearing masks and taking precautions like proper hand washing, is to build your immunity and to get enough rest to ensure that you're really taking care of you. A lot of self-care.
One of the articles I give out to my clients is this, I've forgotten, it was a medical doctor, and he was talking about, all these precautions. But what I liked about what he had to say, he says, you're in your house, you've washed your hands, and you've taken the precautions you need to take. You're in your safe house now. Touch your face all you want. Instead of this, don't touch your face, don't, which by the way, I just knew I wasn't going to be able to do that. But he said,
Yes.
in your house, don't worry about touching your face. You're in the grocery store, worry, don't touch your face. So
Right.
he really set up a more realistic kind of way to think of it. Instead of being like in a state of vigilance and fear all the time, he said like, okay, you get in your house, you've taken your precautions, you washed your hands, everything. Now you can relax, you're safe. And I think the news doesn't always give you that kind of sense. It's like you need to be hyper vigilant. And by the way, we do need to wash our hands, and we do need to take precautions and do all the things that they're suggesting that we do. I'm not saying that, but we can focus on the virus, right? Or we can focus on our response to the virus and what can help us. And just like in life, nothing makes us invulnerable. And I think Americans, we really struggle with uncertainty and being vulnerable. And that's why people are starting to get restless.
Yes, they are. I noticed in the supermarket I went to the first time in a couple weeks the other day, and it just was a vibe in there that, I don't know, it's a very uncomfortable vibe to be in that setting. And before it was so natural, just walk in, get your stuff done. And, it was like people are trying to maneuver around one another and they feel awkward. And then I actually experienced somebody that a worker that wasn't moving. And I said, excuse me, would you mind if I just step in and grab some bananas and get out? And he got angry with me and he's like, just go and get them. And another patron said, well, she doesn't want to step right next to you because the 6-foot thing, can you just move? So, it's a very awkward time of how everybody has to communicate and we're doing like a dance almost. That's awkward. It's unnatural.
Yeah, and what happens with this much stress, it's like in our nervous system, it's like people are stopping on the accelerator in a car and you're going from 0 to 60, or you're stopping, and so you go 0 to 60 with your anger or 0 to 60 with your anxiety. And then the freeze response is the part of us, we feel overwhelmed, we don't feel like we can fight, we don't feel like we can run away. Then our nervous system kicks into this kind of numbing freeze response, which is like slamming on the brake. And a lot of that's going on.
I think so. I saw like just some real strange, not strange behaviors, but just different reactions that you normally don't see, and it's like everybody just is, like you said, on high alert. And I think it's playing in the background for all of us, even though we're doing our best. A lot of us are working on that and trying to do that. So can you talk to us about specifically using intention statements with tapping and sound therapy for self-care and transformation as we go through this and then beyond? Because eventually we will overcome this and be okay, but I'd love your wisdom on that.
Right. There's a colleague of mine, Gene, who says, by the way, that there's a 20% energy tax. So when we wake up, like 20% of our energy is going right away to this because of the effects of the pandemic. And I think there's some truth to that. We don't even realize, all these changes, how it can have a drain on us. So I was just tagging on what you said. But Steve Wells is a person I work with online down in Australia that he kind of evolved emotional freedom technique to simple energy techniques and does continual tapping on the finger points and just aiming your attention and tuning into what is going on and following that, as opposed to following the more traditional formula. Then he's developed, borrowing on some of the other works of people and putting together his own technique of making intention statements. So an intention statement would be like, I release all of my emotional attachments to the coronavirus. So emotional attachments here would be all the emotional entanglements, both from our past and our fear of the futures, all that kind of subconscious material. So by saying this statement while we're tapping, we're sending a direct message to our unconscious mind, which is wiser. Say, okay, we want to work on this now. And then we just wait and see what comes up. And often the next layer that we need to work on will come up. So something as global as I release all my emotional attachments to the coronavirus, then what might come up is a specific way. I'm worried about this colleague of mine at work that they're not socially distancing, Then you'd say, I release all my emotional attachments to Bob, who isn't social distancing. And that doesn't mean you're not going to take precautions, but it removes the anxiety about it. So then you can make choices. In fact, I was working with a client the other day. It was fearful to go back to work because people weren't following the protocols. And so it wasn't that that's not still a problem, but what we did by the end of the session, by using these statements and tapping and following the different ways they were sticking to her, she felt much more empowered to go into work and be assertive without becoming really extreme, because she was really angry. So she, so she got into a more centered place where she could calmly, kind of advocate and playfully kind of tell people, no, you can't come in here. You're not, whatever needs to happen. So it was really, it was interesting to see the physiological changes in her face and her body language and the energy coming up and being more, less anxious and more empowered to assert for herself. Problem still was there, right? But all the baggage that was there went away. The second statement is that when you make that statement, say, I release all my emotional attachments to coronavirus, you may notice your chest tension or tightness of the throat. Then we say, I restore right energy flow to my throat. And often it'll mitigate that. If not, it's usually because there's another layer that we need to probably go and explore and tap on. So this one is different in that way that it's a singular statement. It's not an affirmation statement. You say it once, you tap through all the points, you wait, you notice what comes up, you share that, and then the art is how do you frame that and go to the next thing. It's pretty effective. I find that it's very organic. I don't get lost in all the wordiness of the traditional tapping, and it moves pretty quickly.
Yeah. I think that's wonderful. How are you doing your therapy sessions now? You're doing them over Zoom or some other application?
Yeah, I'm doing them all online through a HIPAA compliant. As a licensed marriage and family therapist, we have to follow the HIPAA rules, and of course, some of them are secured by HIPAA and some are not. So doxy.me is the one that I'm using.
Is there any special projects that you're working on, to further your research or things that people should be looking for in the near future from you?
Well, I'm working on, I just did an online presentation at the Spring Energy Conference, which was going to be held in New Jersey, and then it went online when we couldn't get together. So I did one on the transformational power of sound. And so I had a talk and then gave them, had a recording of a 20-minute sound meditation. So I am going to be doing a class for healers and coaches and therapists online on, haven't got a date yet, but on the transformational power of sound. So the 3 levels for that is teaching about relaxation, integrating it in with your existing models and how you can use it. And then the 3rd level is actually as a standalone therapy modality using sound, by itself, or in combination with things like IEP. I just had a class last night where I was showing therapists how you could do the tapping, do those tension statements, and then use sound to help move things. What sound does, I can't remember if I said this before, but it gets the conscious mind out of the way and opens up the doors to the unconscious so we can find out what's the deeper stuff that's kind of creating our blocks.
Yeah, right. Well, how do people locate you, Greg? What's your website, that sort of thing? Contact info.
My website's www.gcarpenter.net. It's a blog, but all my contact information is there. And I write different articles. I try to have at least like one a month. There's also a newsletter. If you look down the right-hand column, there's a place where you can sign up for a newsletter. Also ZenCare, I think it's zencare.co/Greg-Carpenter is, but if you just look my name up on ZenCare, zencare.co is a great resource. So that has a video of me talking about therapy and gives all the information about my therapy practice. And I'm also on a Psychology Today listing, but the zencare.co is probably the best one for people who are interested in getting into therapy. But my contact information is easily found right on gcarpenter.net. The other thing is, if you're interested in sound therapy, I do a lot of sound meditations, or I should say I did a lot of sound meditations when we could get out. And I record those and edit those. And so I also have a YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/ /C/Greg Carpenter. And I have about 50 different recordings up there. Some are hour-long sound meditations. Some are different pieces I've extracted. People who like just the gongs or the singing bowls or the flutes. I also, I love the Native American flute, so I'm always playing with the Native American flute. So I also have some albums that I've recorded at gregcarpenter.bandcamp.com. That's right. Anyhow, it's on Bandcamp. I have 3 albums of where I've taken recordings from all these meditations I've done. So it's like one of them's Native American flutes and crystal singing bowls. Various combinations. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love that. I just really enjoy it. And I can remember the drummings. I think probably my retreat center is where you started some of the drummings in the early stages.
I
So
was really, you met me really literally at the beginning of my journey into sound and ambient sound and using sound and sound therapy. I was the first, I think, it wasn't the first event I got to, but it might have been the second event that I went to where we had the Spirit and Nature walk.
yes.
And Alan did a sound bath that night. Yeah, Alan
Yes.
Stonewall.
Yes.
Yeah, so yeah, you met me right at the very beginning of that. That was probably around 2011, I'm guessing.
Yes, it was. Fascinating, huh? How we've transformed and taken that knowledge to more levels and into service, bringing it to service people in different ways. So thank you so much for all you shared today, Greg. I really appreciate it. I hope the watching audience enjoyed it too, and they get in touch with you. One more time, just say your website one more time so people can get in touch.
Okay, yeah, it's www.gcarpenter.net.
Very good. Yeah. And Zen Desk or Zen.
And then it's Zencare, zencare.co/Greg-Carpenter.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Greg. So nice to see you. Namaste.
Yes. Blessings on you as well.
Thank you. Have a great day.
All right. Take care. Thank you.
So I'll edit that off. But yeah, thanks so much.
So we're off the recording? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'll stop. For joining me on Wellness Virtually, and I look forward to seeing you on the next show. Check out my website, mindhealthcoach.com.